It's better to mix your vaccines rather than take the same dose again. But it's a half dose of Moderna that's been approved. That's what Moderna applied for. And it looks as though, compared to half a dose of Moderna versus the full dose of Pfizer, they're about the same. So I wouldn't worry too much. If Pfizer's the one you can get, that's the one you should take.
And you can now get a booster 5 months, not 6 months after your second vaccine dose. Does that bring more protection if you do that?
Yeah, well, the earlier, the better. Now, the 5 months is still a decision made in the Delta world, and Delta is still the dominant virus. Yeah. So at 5-6 months in Israel, that's when you started to see significant waning of vaccine effectiveness. Astra is a little bit earlier at 4 months. That's Delta. Now, we're living in a world where we don't know that much about Omicron. And with Omicron, it may be that you actually have to move it even earlier. There were data released last week from Britain, which kind of explained why Boris Johnson went for a 3-month booster in Britain. It's when they looked at their first 500 or 600 cases of Omicron in November and looked at their vaccination status, they discovered that at 15 weeks, there was significant decline in both Pfizer and Astra vaccines' effectiveness against the Omicron variant. Not only that, the people who'd had Astra, and it was 15 weeks after their second dose, had almost no protection against symptomatic disease.
And that's scary.
It is scary. However, it's too early to say what the protection is against hospitalization and severe disease. Let me just explain for a moment. The hardest task you're asking of a vaccine is to protect against all infection. That's really hard, and not very many vaccines of any kind do that. The next hardest thing, but it's much easier for the vaccine, is to prevent symptoms. So yeah, it's falling at that hurdle, but it's much easier for a vaccine to prevent severe disease. So it's likely that it does. It just needs fewer antibodies, a lower immune response to do that. So, point being that I think that ATAGI in Australia, the advisory group, is going to be under pressure, I suspect, to move it even earlier than that for Omicron, so that you get a booster maybe at 3 or 4 months. But meantime, if you're eligible at 5 months, get whatever you can get.
Get it. We've had the first hospitalisation of somebody with the Omicron variant here in Australia. What do we know about that case?
Not very much. But the evidence from South Africa so far is that hospitalisation you spend less time in hospital and it seems to be a less severe course. But I must emphasise that what's going on in South Africa could be going on in Australia as well. There's a large proportion of the population in South Africa who have immunity of some kind, whether it be from infection or vaccination. With us, it's mostly vaccination. Actually, it doesn't matter very much. It's the same antibodies. Now, what happens is the virus infects people, but they've got some resistance left to the virus. So they don't necessarily get a severe form of the disease. What we don't know yet is if it goes into somebody who's entirely unvaccinated with no previous infection, what does it do to them? And they tend to be younger people in the community. I'm looking at that tomorrow night on 7:30, and we'll just see.
There's still lots of uncertainty about
Huge.
Omicron. When are we going to know the answers to these very important questions?
Well, we'll know about hospitalisation in the next 2 or 3 weeks because, as we all know, it takes a couple of weeks for severe disease to emerge. You get infected, you're okay for the first week, 10 days, and then you fall off the cliff and you end up in hospital, and then whether you end up in ICU. So that takes a couple of weeks, and the numbers are low, and it's mostly younger people at the moment. So it is going to take time for that to flow through the system. In terms of vaccine effectiveness, we kind of know that already, and there are no prizes for waiting here. So the pressure is probably on in Australia to move the 3rd dose, rather than, I think, best calling it a 3rd dose, earlier in the process.